All right, what if you launched a brand new product and it was declared dead on arrival? Today, we're diving into one of the greatest comeback stories in business history. We're going to talk about how a pharmaceutical brand, one that was totally written off as a failure, somehow managed to claw its way to the very top of an absolutely brutal market. Yeah, this is the big question, isn't it? I mean, it just sounds impossible, right? How does a product that pretty much everyone has given up on not just survive, but go on to become the best-selling drug in its company's entire history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. Okay, so to really get this comeback, you first have to understand the massive challenge they were up against. Let's set the scene. It's the late 1990s, and the market for antihypertensives, high blood pressure medication, it's an absolute war zone, just packed with these huge established giants.
So you can see here, Diovan's world was, well, it was tiny. It was part of this new class of drugs called angiotensin II antagonists, and they made up a measly 8% of the market. Think about that. They were a tiny little fish in this massive pond, just dominated by older, much more established drugs like beta blockers and ACE inhibitors. So they weren't just a new product, they were a whole new type of product, and they were fighting for just a sliver of attention.
And if that wasn't bad enough, Diovan wasn't even the first one in its own little category. Nope, Merck had already pioneered the class with their drug Cozar a year earlier. Then, right after Diovan launched, bam! 2 more massive competitors jumped into the ring. So from day one, they were late to the party and just completely surrounded.
So with that absolutely brutal market setup, you gotta wonder, how did Diovan do in its first year? Well, this is where we get to the real conflict of the story. The launch was, to put it mildly, a total disaster.
Just $80 million. Now, in the world of blockbuster drugs, where you're expecting launches to bring in hundreds of millions, this number, it was a massive, massive disappointment. It was, for all intents and purposes, a commercial flop.
And look, this wasn't just a low number. It was a really painful confirmation of what everyone secretly feared. That the market was just too crowded, that they were too late, and that the competition was way too strong. It really looked like the story of Diovan was over before it had even begun. So what do you do when your multi-million-dollar launch completely tanks? I mean, most people would just cut their losses, right? But the brand team at Novartis, they did something incredibly bold. Instead of accepting defeat, they went to top management and argued not for retreat, but for a complete relaunch. A long-term, super ambitious strategy that was built on a few key advantages they believed everyone else was overlooking. And this right here, this was their playbook. It was a brilliant 5-step plan. Step 1, stop thinking small. Let's compete directly with the big guys, the market leaders. 2, prove we're actually better than our direct rivals. 3, find new ways for doctors to use the drug. 4, and this is the absolute key, back up every single claim with a massive program of clinical trials. And finally, number 5, aggressively make sure every single doctor hears about those results. So then they boiled this whole complex strategy down into a simple, really powerful message that every doctor could immediately get. Protective, effective, and selective. It was memorable, it was super confident, and it just perfectly captured their new vision for the brand. But look, a great slogan is one thing. The team knew that just wasn't going to be enough. The real key to victory, the absolute game changer, was executing that 4th step of the plan. Generating undeniable, hard scientific proof that Diovan was, in fact, a superior drug. And this all came from a really deep understanding of their audience. Think about it. Cardiologists are scientists, right? They aren't going to be swayed by some slick marketing campaign. What they trust is data. They respect evidence. So Novartis decided to give them an overwhelming amount of it. So instead of just focusing on, general high blood pressure, they poured millions into clinical trials. They wanted to prove that Diovan could also treat patients with congestive heart failure, people who had just had a heart attack, and other really high-risk cases. So you see, this wasn't just about being a better drug. It was about becoming a more useful drug. They were fundamentally expanding its purpose and its value to doctors and patients.
All right, so the big question, did this incredibly expensive, super long-term gamble actually work? Well, this brings us to the payoff. And let me tell you, it is absolutely spectacular.
Let's just quickly rewind and remember where we started. A disappointing $80 million in year 1. A number that, for all intents and purposes, spelled failure. Okay, fast forward to 2007. Just a decade after that disastrous launch, Diovan was pulling in $5 billion in annual sales. The five-step plan wasn't just working, it was a monumental success.
And it didn't even stop there. By 2010, Diovan hit $6.1 billion in sales. It became the single best-selling drug in the company's entire history. I mean, think about that. From an $80 million flop to a $6.1 billion megastar. Just an absolutely legendary turnaround.
But there was one final kind of hidden piece to their whole strategy. Remember we talked about those overlooked advantages? Well, when Novartis decided to pour all that money into clinical trials, they knew something absolutely crucial. Their patent was set to expire last. This gave them the longest runway, the longest period of market exclusivity to earn back that massive investment and just dominate the field long after their rivals went generic. It was a modest advantage for sure, but they leveraged it perfectly.
And really, that's the big takeaway from this whole amazing story. Diophan's success, it wasn't about some single miracle moment. It was about finding a modest clinical advantage and a slightly later patent date, and then having the guts to build an aggressive long-term strategy around them. So the question that leaves us with is this: what small, overlooked advantage is hiding in plain sight in your world, just waiting to be turned into a game-changing strategy?